Dr. Diana Stafford, also known as the Detox Doc. Welcome to Tick Boot Camp Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're really excited to have you. I mean, this is a topic that is really important in this community. We've always focused on detox generally and mold in particular. And you are an author of one of the leading mold books that we've heard about on many occasions. So why don't we start there? Talk to us about your book.
Great, thank you. So my book is Conquering Mold. It was published just a few months ago. And so this book I had been wanting to write for quite a long time because, really I wanted an updated, comprehensive mold book. It does include a little info on Lyme disease and co-infections. It has a lot of other comorbidities of mold in one of the chapters, chapter 9. So it goes from what is mold, literally back to basics, what is mold, zooming out, and then, mycotoxins, the toxins put out by mold and other mold byproducts that can cause illness. How do they do that? How is mold causing illness in the variety of different ways? And then, what can we do about it? Also talks about testing. So and a little bit about my mold story, but mostly about, it's for people who are dealing with mold or maybe dealing with mold, unexplained health symptoms, things like that. And then, all the different ways that you can get it out of your system and have it not affect you. So that's really what we try to do with that book. There's a lot of charts and, useful things for people to keep in mind. So I wrote it with my husband, Andrew, and it has, mold photos in it from my colleague who's a mold assessor. And so it is, it was really just such a great project, and I love it. So I hope that,
So,
your listeners will check it out.
so Dr. Stafford, is this the first book you've written?
No, so this is our third book.
You say,
Andrew
oh,
and
you and
I.
your husband have co-authored books together before?
Yes. So we have another book that was published last year, which is Candida Detox. Woo, that's great. Candida Detox. I was just showing it on the screen for those of you listening. And that was born out of last summer when I had these videos that went crazy viral, 10 to 12 million views about Candida on TikTok and Instagram. And just there was a Candida craze basically. And which I think is great because Candida is a really important topic. So Candida Detox is, it's only about 100 pages. It's a quick read. But we really wanted to get that information out quickly to people when, that Candida craze, if you will, was going on. And our first book is a gut health handbook that we're actually revamping right now and making the second edition of. It's called The Inner Journey. And that book basically goes through all the different organs in the digestive system. And it tells you, like, if you have this symptom, for example, relating to the stomach, then what are some tests that you may want to have done? What are some supplements that may be helpful? And what are some medications that may be helpful? So it kind of frames it from like head to, top to bottom of the intestinal tract. And so those are our three books and always new projects in the works.
Well, I'm looking forward to digging into the three books as we get later on the podcast. So let me introduce you to folks. So tell us about your background. Where did you grow up, and where did you go to school for both your undergraduate and your graduate training?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I grew up here in Virginia Beach, where I currently live. And I went to undergrad at University of Maryland in the DC area. I went to med school at University of Virginia over in Charlottesville. And then I did my residency back in DC. So I kind of hopped around the DMV area. And then, so I met my husband, and he is from California. So we actually moved to San Diego after that. We're not military. He was briefly, but we just end up living in places where there are military bases. And then we decided to move back closer to family here in Virginia Beach. So we've been all over the place, but I live back home again and loving that. And I am a conventionally trained MD. So that was, med school, residency, regular MD training. I was practicing in regular primary care. I did pediatrics for a long time. And then now I'm doing functional. So I'm not sure if you want the story on that
Fill
right
that
now.
out for us. So how did you go from traditional allopathic medical doctor training to moving over to the functional piece?
So I had always been a fan of the more natural approach. Like I would even suggest supplements to my patients, and lo and behold, my patients were getting the best outcomes. And my colleagues were asking me why that was, and I would tell them it's because I'm including natural supplements. And as time went on, I became pretty disenchanted with the system because it did not give me the time that I wanted to spend with patients in order to actually listen and actually think about what was going on with them, because we're just expected in about 5 minutes to go ahead and fit them into a diagnostic box in order that insurance will cover it, go ahead and prescribe something and move on to the next patient. So I just really was getting sick of that. So it takes a while to get out of the system once you decide you want to get out of it, as it turns out.
So in
So
fact, can I ask you to pause for a second? And when you say the system, you mean the insurance system?
I mean, the medical system. So basically, insurance and administration, all the shots, like they run the show. Doctors are basically a cog in the wheel for the most part. So that was not ideal. And, definitely working to change that. But I even, when I discovered mold as something that I wanted to include in my practice, I even brought some research and things like that into my practice, into the administrator's office. And I actually showed them, oh, hey, here is something that I think would be really interesting to include here in this practice, in this group practice. And I mean, they rejected it flat out. The administrators were like, that, insurance isn't going to cover any of that. But, I really wanted to help people with who are dealing with mold exposure, which is millions of people, and also just gut health, which is, my other main specialty. So, which is really not dealt with very well within the medical system. So I decided that I was going to get out and do my own practice. And people in the system doesn't like it when you decide to do that. They, without going into too much detail, they basically just try to make your life very difficult until you get out, because it's not, because they kind of know that functional health is better, and they know that you're going to be competition. And so, there's all sorts of things that happen when you try to get out of the medical system. But anyway,
So, so let's talk about that, because it's a very important part of what we develop here at Tick Boot Camp. Because what we've come to learn about the medical system is, if you have an acute injury or an acute illness, that the traditional medical system, the allopathic medical system, is a really good system. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, you work with an orthopedist, and you're going to get a good outcome. You have a traditional cold or a traditional sickness, and you go to your primary care physician, and you're generally going to get a very good outcome. Where things start to come apart in the system is when we become chronically ill, and chronic illnesses are certainly taking off. And I certainly would love your thoughts on that. But let's bookmark that for a second, and just talk about the system. So, for people who are acutely ill or acutely injured, I think we have a really good system. What are your thoughts on the acute versus the chronic care elements of the system?
I totally agree, Rich. I think that is a great way to put it. We will always need the ER, hospitals, and urgent care kind of things. But I believe that primary care has become too much like urgent care. It's not really helping people manage to stay healthy. It's just barely helping you to get by and get to that next prescription. So absolutely, for chronic illness, or even just health maintenance, I really don't think that the medical system is serving people.
Well, now I'm an older guy, I've had many different doctors in my life. Although, quite frankly, I don't have a primary care physician right now because there really is that, the kind of relationship that I grew up in, we just don't have. During my childhood, we had a local doctor. He became a friend of all of ours. He came to know us as well as we knew ourselves. And there were many occasions during my childhood where we had an emergent situation surface, and the family doctor would come to our house, and he would, for example, in one occasion when I was sick during my childhood, Dr. Nadell came to our house, put my brother on the bus, came back to the house, and ultimately, helped my mother get through what we needed to get through for me to be admitted to the hospital. So we had this very, very close relationship with a doctor who didn't have to look at his chart when we came into his office. We had an intimate relationship with him, and he understood who we were. And I've never had another relationship like that since I started college and he retired. Um, and like I never felt pressed for time. I never felt like he wasn't listening. I always felt like we were getting a high quality of care. And then the system changed. And the system changed, I don't think because doctors were trained differently. I don't think the system changed because doctors had different desires to do anything other than help people get well. What happened was the insurance system and the pharmacological system took control of the medical system. And when that took place, now there were very tight time restrictions placed on the doctor-patient relationship. There were incentives put in place to essentially set up a subscription model for us to be on pharmacological care. And of course, there was a disincentive to do the kinds of things that you were doing, which is to help your patients become well and to practice wellness rather than to just treat us when we get sick. And I really don't blame that, quite frankly, on the doctors or medical training. I blame that on, the insurance system, which went on steroids when, first when the Clinton administration, decided to create the managed care system, and ultimately when Obamacare came into place. I mean, we've all lost the ability to have the kind of relationship we'd like to have with doctors. Um, and
Yeah.
and I think that's really the challenge. So like when you were saying I want to leave the medical system, I wanted to challenge you on that a little bit. You really want to leave the system that's controlled by insurance carriers and the system that's controlled by big pharma. Isn't that really what you wanted to leave?
Well, yes. I mean, now I have my own practice, so I did leave the system. I don't answer to anybody, so except my clients. So, I definitely agree. I think the interesting piece to that too that people don't realize is that they still I graduated medical school almost 15 years ago, but at that point at least they still made us feel like we were going to get that healer's experience with patients. Like I went to people's houses on a rotation, not realizing that that was so far from what I was actually going to be doing in practice. It was sort of false pretenses.
False
So
advertising.
false advertising. Absolutely. Yeah. Not good. So
So of course, it's a system that's not working for almost any of us, right? We as patients now do not have the ability to have a relationship with our doctors. Certainly, the kind of intimate relationship my family had with our family doctor.
yeah.
Doctors are burning out because they have a healing spirit. They have a desire to heal people, but they're not permitted to spend the time with their patients that they need to spend with their patients in order to help them to heal. And you're going from patient to patient to patient. You essentially have become an assembly line worker, and then the tools that you are given in order to properly treat patients, and let's talk about the difference between research and clinical care, where what a clinician is supposed to be doing is they're supposed to be assessing the patient, determining whether or not the patient fits within um, the bell-shaped curve. Well, they're an outlier. And if the patient is an outlier, the clinician is then supposed to have the freedom to use their education, their training, to come up with a set of steps that would allow the physician to come up with a healing plan for the outlier. But you're not allowed to do any of that, right? So it's just a system that doesn't work for anyone except for, I guess, companies like United Healthcare and maybe Big Pharma.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, especially for, yeah, things like Lyme disease or other things. I mean, they're going to get missed or just, treated in the cookie cutter way. And that isn't really going to address everything going on. So, yeah, I mean, there's no mention of like inflammation or like any of the underlying causes. It's just, okay, you got X, Y, and Z thing, here's A, B, and C medicine, and, you know, there's not a lot of thinking that happens.
Well, but it's more than not a lot of thinking, I would argue to you, Dr. Stafford, but it's not allowed, you're not allowed to use your training. You're not allowed to
No.
use the desire that you have to heal people. And one of the things that we hear in our community all the time is that the reason Lyme patients are being failed by doctors is because they're not given proper education and not given proper training. And I actually challenge that. I disagree with that. And one of the reasons why I disagree with that is that we interviewed Dr. Joseph Burrascano, who's from the same community that Matt and I are from. Dr. Burrascano is a little bit older than me, and he was on the front lines of Lyme disease in the 70s. And Dr. Burrascano, who like it was right when Lyme disease was being discovered. He certainly didn't have any training on on how to treat patients with Lyme disease. And if you look at his healing protocol, which we've looked at very carefully, that he created in the 70s. It's right on point. It's the best way that you can go through a process of healing from Lyme disease. So he didn't have Lyme training, he didn't have Lyme education, but based on his clinical experiences and his willingness to take risks to treat outliers, which sort of became his entire practice, he was very successful. And then what happened? Because he was not using generally accepted medical practices, he got ultimately pulled before the medical board and was not suspended, but was put on a supervisory plan for 2 years, even though this poor guy was right long ago. So I think, Dr. Stafford, you are given the training that you need to be successful in treating the outliers that come to you with chronic illnesses. And you have, again, you're all really smart people. You're not going to medical school if you're not close to a genius, if not a genius. So you have the gray matter to do it, but the system is not allowing you to treat us.
Yeah, so I definitely don't think that applies to Lyme. With mold, it's really not covered, or at least wasn't covered in med school, except for allergies. So I think, you know, we see these doctors on TV shows, sitting around just chatting and like pontificating about different things and arriving at these great conclusions, but that doesn't really happen. And so then they're just thinking, oh, mold, okay, allergy, okay, respiratory. And then it's like not really something that they'll explore, maybe because, they weren't taught it or whatever, or also because it gets very messy. And as far as money goes, like who's responsible if mold can cause all of this? Like, is it when it's from their home, or where is it from? So it also gets really messy. So mold is a little bit odd when it comes to mold and the medical system, but working to change that by being an MD who's like very open about um, the fact that mycotoxins and other mold byproducts can cause illness in other
So
ways.
yeah, so let's explore that. So you work you do your residency, you ultimately work in the traditional system. You start to see as a good clinician that there are some tools that you want to develop so that you can treat your outlier patients who are suffering from chronic illness as opposed to acute illnesses. How do you go down the path with mold and gut health, and how do you get down those paths if it wasn't a part of your traditional education and training?
I took functional medicine courses. I picked and chose, like, I don't have one certification from one organization. I found all the best courses from all the different places that I wanted. I'm mold certified from Jill Krista, and I took Evan Brand's courses and, some IFM courses and a variety of different ones. So that's what I did. And we also had personal experience. Like, my husband had chronic gut issues. And so I had, that experience being, his personal chef, and also, just helping him, as he was not really helped that well by the medical system and ended up healing more through supplements and things like that, and other like unconventional treatments. So there were multiple, avenues through which I arrived at my specialties. And, plus I just love what I do. So, yeah, those are a few of the ways in which I got to where I am today.
So you shared with us, Dr. Stafford, that you were trying to bring some of these treatment protocols as you were on this postgraduate path of gaining certifications and training in the functional arena. You were trying to bring some of that to the traditional practice, and you were not received favorably. In fact, you were told that you couldn't use these treatment protocols. Now, do you believe that the traditional practice that you were working in at the time were not friendly, or quite frankly were hostile to bringing in these functional tools because they weren't going to get paid? Or were they concerned that because they weren't a part of the generally accepted medical practice, that they had concerns about liability?
Probably a component of both. And, I am not going to take up for anybody, but I also just don't blame them, because basically everyone's just stuck in a loop in primary care, or at least were in the practices that I was in. And yeah, it's just, you're kind of just going throughout the day and night, charting and everything, and being on call. Not too much sleep. Everyone's kind of burned out, just kind of survival mode, probably in fight or flight, so
Yeah.
definitely I think it's just a combination of things that, really requires entire systemic restructure. So yeah, I mean, one of my life goals is to have functional health be at least an add-on for insurance plans. And I know some religious insurances do it, some HSA and FSA plans will cover it, but still largely not covered by insurance. So we're kind of working on that. And I know there are some other groups and things working on that as well, but it's primary care of the future needs to be functional health.
So let's talk about Dr. Burnout for a second, and then I want to talk to you about gaslighting. But the Dr. Burnout piece first. Um, I I define emotional health as pursuing your purpose. If you're pursuing your purpose, then you're going to be emotionally healthy. If you're not pursuing your purpose and you're not creating within the confines of the way God created you, then you're not going to be healthy. And I think one of the reasons why so many doctors are unhealthy is because they have a healing spirit. They're generally very smart people. They've invested a great deal of time and money into developing a whole set of healing tools, and then they have reins put on them. And they have these people who they can help, who they would help, but they're not permitted to help, which then causes the doctor to feel like they're not doing what they were created to do, which then causes them to become emotionally unhealthy. So I think part of what's happening here is that you're overwhelmed with all the work that you have to do because you have limited amount of time and you're on assembly line. Part of what's happening is you have a lack of sleep, and of course we're all going to be unhealthy and toxic when we're not getting enough sleep. But part of what's going on here is that your very purpose, you're being prevented from pursuing your purpose. You're being prevented from creating the way God created you to serve. And that's going to make anyone emotionally unhealthy. Give me your thoughts on that. And do you think that's part of the reason why there are so many challenges, at least in the Lyme community, in the doctor-patient relationship?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a very, very high rate of doctor burnout. And it it has a ripple effect, because then what we see is in functional health, because it's becoming more popular, functional, integrative, choose your term, holistic, whatever you want to call it. Then there are people, other people who are filling in that space, who have very little, if any, medical training and are just calling themselves practitioners or specialists or
Coaches.
consultants, coaches. Yes. So, which, and God bless all of them, I think they're great, but people don't understand that they don't have the same training. Like many people assume, maybe not you who are listening, but many people do, that they have all this training when they really do not. So I think that's a huge problem that has also come from the problems with the medical system. And that also is not serving people well. So it's just so many layers
Well,
here. I think.
yeah, I mean, look, on another level, Dr. Stafford, I think it's again part of the insurance model, which clearly I'm very critical of, and clearly I'm very unhappy with. But
No, not you, Rich. Come on.
one of the things that has happened as a result of insurance companies taking control of the medical system is we have these things called medical extenders, where it's very difficult to get to a doctor. You'll go to a practice and you'll see a PA, and I think PAs are wonderful, but quite frankly, I want to see a doctor. You can see a nurse practitioner. I think they're wonderful as well, but I want to see a doctor, right? And when I'm engaging in my conversations with the medical practitioners that I'm interacting with, when I'm told that I'm going to see a PA or I'm told that I'm going to see a nurse practitioner or some other type of extender, my answer is no, I don't want to see one of them. So then what inevitably comes back to me is, well, why not? And I said, because they weren't smart enough to go to medical school, and I want the person that goes to medical school to treat me, right? And that's what
You
that's
heard it here on Tick Boot Camp.
right. The problem that we have here, where we have these sort of other folks offering medical advice when they don't have the education, they don't have the training, and they don't have, quite frankly, in my view, the gray matter to serve me the way I want to be served, is that we now have all kinds of other extenders like coaches and all these other people, because the insurance system has done that within the system, and now we extend that out to other places, right? So quite frankly, you've all, your own system has created this problem because we rarely get to medical doctors, which I think we should always be. So we here at Tick Boot Camp are always celebrating the contributions that coaches and other folks can provide. But we also tell our folks is, you cannot be your own doctor. And it's a big battle that we have within our community. We hear people saying, you have to be your own doctor. Like, no, you don't. You don't have the training. You don't have the education. And just like I tell you as a lawyer, you can't be your own lawyer. You can't be your own doctor either. You need to work with a medical doctor, and you need to make sure that while you're doing all of these, you're going through the trial and error process that you have to go through, especially when you have to step outside of the system because the system is failing you, you still need to work with a doctor. You still need to have a relationship with a doctor, and you still need to run this up the doctor's tree before you do something, or at least get the doctor's input before you start doing these things. So give me your reaction to all of that. And I'm not asking you to be as radical as me, but give me your thoughts on
Oh man.
medical
There's a lot.
extenders have really triggered these other medical folks.
Oh man. So this is great. This is great. So I love that. Yeah, I mean, I'm proud to be an MD. I do believe that my training was very useful. I went to one of the top med schools.
Yes, you did.
And it was hard, so it was definitely I'm proud to be an MD is all I'm saying about that. So most of my audience on social media, for example, it is has been gaslit by the medical system. Many of them are anti-doctor, but so it's a very interesting place for me to be, because I am a doctor, right? So, and so I have to be really, careful with my position, and I respect that because people have been very hurt, like deeply, deeply wounded by the medical system, and just the experiences they've had there. So, I'm kind of like in that unique position where, because I mean, I see clients out of state, and I'm not, technically, doing that as a doctor. Like, I'm technically a coach out of state, but I'm still using my knowledge. So it's very, very,
But let's talk about that
interesting.
because I was getting to the gaslighting subject next. So you
Mhm.
anticipated my next subject that I wanted to talk with you
I
about.
remember you said that.
And so now, why don't we first define what gaslighting is, and let's talk about why the system is creating the gaslighting and how we still need to be able to work with our medical doctors, even if we're feeling gaslit, that we should not be stepping out of the system entirely and stepping away from the system entirely, even though we've been gaslit. So let's first define gaslighting, and then let's talk about why it's happening.
Yeah, so for me, medical gaslighting is when somebody presents with a range of symptoms or whatever they're dealing with, and basically they're dismissed for, whatever reason. So, to put it simply, and I mean, why does it happen? Time constraints, disbelief, pre-existing notions about a wide range of things. I mean, there's a whole list of why it could potentially happen, but
We
I mean,
started to
generally,
build.
it's just not okay.
We started to build out some of that though, right? I mean, so because
Yeah.
what I'm saying is it's not okay to be gaslit, but what is not okay is that we step out of the medical system when we are gaslit. And that's the piece that I want to explore with you because
Mm.
one of the reasons why gaslighting is happening is because doctors are burning out. And the reason doctors are burning out and they're not emotionally healthy is because they are not allowed to serve you the way they want to serve you. They're working within a practice and they're working within a legal structure that limits their ability to help you. So when they want to help you but can't help you, they're in a difficult position. They either confess to you that they can't help you, which is then going to cause you to be frustrated, or they can't acknowledge that you really have what's going on. So they do their best to try to help you, which is causing them to suffer emotionally because they're not pursuing their purpose and they don't have the time to work with you. And we just have this really ugly cycle that's taking us down a drain. But I think we do have to explore why it's happening, right? I mean, if I'm hungry, I'm going to be cranky. If I don't have enough sleep, I'm going to be cranky. If I, if I can't do what I think my in my case as a lawyer, if I can't help my client the way I believe I can help my client, that's going to frustrate me, right? So we have all of these systemic pressures coming down on the doctor, and then what they do is they don't always support you emotionally the way you need to be supported, which then causes you to feel gaslit, which then causes you to step out of the system, which I think is really dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is. I think, I do believe that everybody, I think, can say that as a blanket statement, needs, and I can also use that strong word. Everyone needs a functional or integrative practitioner on their team. Financially, it's difficult, but I'll just put that out there because I mean the regular medical system will implode on itself at some point. It's just a matter of when.
Well, I'd argue that it already has imploded. So let's
Fair.
let's um so let's take the next step and talk about chronic illness, right? And specifically Lyme disease as a chronic illness, right? Because we have an acute presentation of Lyme disease, and then there's a chronic presentation of Lyme disease. And because there are different presentations, there's a great deal of debate about, whether or not you can treat it simply and how you would treat it simply. And of course, that same divide we see in the medical system generally between acute care and chronic care. So can you first define for us what you believe Lyme disease is?
So what is Lyme disease? I love that. The back to basics on the tick boot camp. So basically it is the infection that is spread by Borrelia burgdorferi, right? But it can be from a tick or it could potentially be from other vectors. There's some literature out there that suggests it could be transmitted by mosquitoes and also through other ways. But that is technically the etiological agent of Lyme disease, is that bacteria. But the actual disease has this whole range of symptoms, as you mentioned. So acutely, you can have a rash, but sometimes you don't. You can have fatigue. That's a little bit later, but you can have headaches, you can have some joint pain, you can have a variety of different things that develop sort of in these waves, depending on what time frame you catch it in. But it's it's hard to diagnose, and not managed well by the regular medical system as well. So I think I know you were mentioning someone's protocol or treatments that you espouse to, but and I have the ones that I think are the best, but it is a complex topic, I guess.
It is a complex topic. So I'm gonna ask you to react to our definition of Lyme disease.
Okay.
One of the things that we find really frustrating in this space that we've been for the last 5 years is that there seem to be as many definitions as there are practitioners. We'll say, well, the CDC definition is X, but I think it's Y, and so and everybody has their own label. So we felt liberated by all these different definitions, and we came up with our own. So I'd like to react to the Tick Boot Camp definition. So we define Lyme disease as a polymicrobial, multisystemic, chronic, infectious, or post-infectious disease. What do you think about our definition of Lyme disease?
I like that. I really like that. I think it's interesting you said chronic because, okay, so then you're saying that, really there isn't just acute Lyme disease. Like you're not only going to have acute Lyme disease. Like it never just it sticks around, in all cases, which I think is so interesting because the CDC just recognized chronic Lyme disease like last year.
Right.
So
We do not believe Lyme disease is an acute disease. We think you could have borreliosis, acute borreliosis, or
mhm,
anaplasmosis, or so you could have
mhm.
an acute presentation of these different microbial responses to these microbes. But we do not believe that's Lyme disease. If you are not chronically ill, we at Boot Camp do not believe you have Lyme disease. It must be chronic. But remember, our definition also includes you could have chronic presentations even though you're no longer infectious, right? And we've spoken a
Absolutely.
lot about these definitions. So that gets me to the excited part. The reason I was so excited to talk to you today, because one of the things we learned very early on, and we struggled with before we developed our education, was that we were told there are only two different vehicles to getting from a tick bite to chronic illness. We were told by both Dr. Rolls and Dr. Phillips early on in our development that at least in their practices as clinicians, and they've written about this in their books, that the only time they saw people going from tick bite to chronic illness was if somebody suffered multiple tick bites at the same time, or if somebody was living in a toxic environment, such as a moldy environment, at the time they were bitten by a tick. So let's put the multiple tick bite uh, conversation aside and let's focus on the mold, since that's your expertise. What do you think about the observations that Dr. Rawls and Dr. Phillips made for us early on in our podcast environment about mold creating the platform for chronic illness very quickly between tick bite and chronic illness?
Absolutely. So I think that's really interesting, and I'll kind of tease that out. So when you're exposed to mold, which you can be exposed to mold toxins even back to like in utero, mycotoxins can cross the placenta. So I work with all ages. I have tested infants. Some of them have had high mycotoxin levels in their urine already. So I think to say that, you have to be exposed to mold at the same time you're bit by the tick, I don't really believe that part because, if you're exposed to both of those things could happen at different times and still both cause the chronic illness,
Okay.
and contribute to the chronic illness, right? Because if you're exposed to mold, then one of the biggest things that mold does is it cuts down your immune system. So then say you were exposed to mold in your college dorm room, and that was like many years ago, but it triggered this inflammation, this chronic inflammatory response. And then later on, you were bit by a tick or however you got Lyme or co-infections. And so your immune system was already compromised. So, it doesn't have to be at the same time.
Okay, but okay, so you're getting to exactly where I want to get to. So I love that we're on the same train. Matt is getting excited. He wants to go, he wants to,
You're
but
killing me,
he
Rich.
can't
You're
wait,
killing
he
me.
can't wait to get to the, he loves mold and he loves all the different strains of mold, but he can't get there yet because he came late. So I get to have my time with Dr. Stafford a little bit longer. So now I want to talk about the thread that ties together your three books. And as you were sharing with us early in the podcast, the three books you've written, the thread I saw that tied them all together was immune dysfunction, right? Your first book was on gut health, and of course,
Yeah.
the majority of our immune system is in our gut. I mean, our gut is what comes in contact with the outside world, where most toxins are going to, or I should say, most germs are going to come into our system, and our gut has to be healthy in order to have a healthy immune system, right? Then we talked about your second book was Candida, right? And of course we know that is of course an overgrowth issue that's going to interfere with gut health and of course interfere with your immune health. And now we have mold, which is going to cause immune dysfunction, right? So that's the thread that's tying everything together. And one of the things that we argue on this podcast is that if you're going to ultimately overcome your chronic illness, at least chronic Lyme disease, you have to have a functioning immune system. Your immune system is ultimately going to have to win the day. And what we should be focusing on is what is causing the immune dysfunction, right? And in most cases, at least I've observed, it's because you're toxic. It's toxicity, right? And it's the toxicity that's ultimately causing you to ultimately have a compromised immune system. Now, it could be toxins from foods. It could be toxins from bugs. It could be toxins from environmental sources like mold. It could be emotional toxins. It could be social toxins. It could be a whole bunch of things coming together, and your platform is vulnerable. And now in the case of what we were talking about at this podcast, now the Lyme disease takes off. Do you agree
Yeah.
with my analysis? And if you don't, tell me what I'm missing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's a terrain issue, right? Like the terrain on the inside is disrupted in from a variety of causes, and then you are left with dysfunction, overactive mast cells, under representation of the good gut bacteria, Candida overgrowth, biofilms. Everything is layers of dysfunction going on there in many cases, and we have to sort of peel back those layers. So yes, I agree.
Do you think the first step a chronic patient should be taking is to go through a detoxification process? We call that prehabilitation here at Tick Boot Camp, because we're always concerned that if you're going to use some medication or whether it be natural or a pharmacological tool, but you're using that without having without having overcoming your immune dysfunction, not dealing with your toxicity, that in most cases it's really just going to be a crutch that you may be forced to utilize long term rather than as a short term tool to reduce the microbe load.
Yeah, so I have four pillars of detox, and my first pillar is protect the body. So the first thing that I talk to people about is making sure you're out of an exposure. Like, so yes, detox, but even before that, making sure you're not having this influx of toxins, clean air, clean water, clean food, stuff like that. We want to make sure that we have those things in place, or at least as much as possible before even detoxing. And then my second one is to make sure the detox pathways are open, and then mobilize the toxins and bind the toxins. So yes, definitely a detox, but as part of that, the first step really has to be that, assessing, addressing the environment if needed, or things like that to make sure that we don't get stuck at like step 0, like you're saying.
All right, so
Dr. Stafford, real quick, I just want to ask Rich. She's teasing me so bad here. So I got to ask, give me some specifics, Dr. Stafford, because people listening, and I know I'm thinking the same thing, and I've tried so many different things to, get myself straight at step 0, as you said, right? What are some specific tools you like and recommend people try, just if they want to say, hey, maybe I'm exposed to mold, maybe I have exposure to heavy metals, maybe I'm sluggish with my lymphatic system, maybe I'm in, fight or flight, maybe I got to get more into rest and digest. What are some really powerful tools that anybody, I don't care if they think they're healthy or if they're suffering from chronic illness, some tools that people can use to help kind of start at step 0?
Yeah, so you mentioned getting out of fight or flight. So that's really important because if your body isn't in a safe space to heal, like doesn't feel safe to heal, then you won't. So I really like to do the basic nervous system exercise, which people can do while they're listening to this. Basically, you lie down and you interlock your fingers behind your head. You keep your head straight, but then you look to each side and it's going to trigger a sigh or a yawn. And that happened for me really quickly because I do it all the time, but it may take some time and it may not even happen on the first try, but look to that side as long as you can. And it should trigger a sigh or a yawn or just like a kind of a release. And then you look to the other side just with your eyes. And that helps with vagal nerve tone. So the vagus nerve, of course, runs from the base of the brain all the way down to the gut, innervating a lot of things in between. So simple vagus nerve exercises you can do on a daily basis. There are, fancier things. There are devices that can help with the vagus nerve, programs, things like that you can do. And I have, all those linked on all my pages and everything for people, but just either breathing exercises or vagus nerve tone exercises is something easy, free, fast that you can start doing. That's a great tool. As far as, assessing and addressing the environment, that's a little bit more complex, but it's important to get your environment, assessed if needed. As far as something else, easy to do is just kind of go to your kitchen, see if there are things that are really toxic that you can reduce, things like anything with fragrance, like any soaps or other things, cleaning products that have fragrance, things like ultra processed foods that are highly toxic, things like a lot of wheat products, or things like a lot of peanut products have a lot of mycotoxins. So just there are foods that will be contributing to your toxin load, because we want to make sure that toxin bucket is not spilling over. So all of these little things we can do really, really do help.
Can we talk about the environment in a little more detail? Because what we've learned is that if you're living in a moldy environment, and I'd like to focus on mold now, and Matt will jump in now. It's your turn, Matt. But if you're living in a moldy, we've learned that if you're living in a moldy environment, that you're not going to get better. It doesn't matter what treatment you're undergoing. It doesn't matter what things you're doing. If you're living in a moldy environment, you're not going to get better. So, can you talk about what types of things people can do to test their environment specifically for mold? And would you agree with me or not that that what you should be doing first with your limited resources is either cleaning up your environment and making sure it's mold free, or leaving that environment and moving somewhere else, because all the rest of the money you spend, if you're not living in a mold free environment, is literally being flushed down the toilet, because you're not going to get better.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I don't believe that you can have it like, 100% mold free, right? It's like low molds. Like we want it to be kind of the similar concentration as the outdoors, right? So, we want to keep it down, so that it's not making any issues with the immune system, making you have symptoms. So yeah, so I totally agree. There are some, big influencers that will say, oh, my protocols work even if you're still in the exposure. It's just not true. I have a resource for people on my info hub on my website that's called What to Do in a Moldy Environment, because I get this question every single day, multiple times. What can I do when I'm in a moldy environment? I can't get out. It's for so many reasons, right? Basically money. So there are some things you can do to reduce your exposure, which are, air purifiers and ventilating the space, and depending on the humidity, dehumidifiers, super, super important to keep the humidity as low as you can. Less than 50% is ideal. And some supplements, generally are safe to do in a moldy environment, things like omega-3s, probiotics, liver support, things like that. But yeah, I definitely agree. And I tell this to people, I do not do programs, mold detox programs, with anyone who is not actively either moving or remediating their space that is moldy, if they're currently in an exposure. I just don't do it. I used to do it. I don't do it anymore. It doesn't work. So I totally agree.
So, is mold different today than it had been in the past? Or do we have, sort of an overload of so many different toxins that we have I guess, a reduced ability to detox from the mold? What do you think it is? Because we've always lived in the Northeast, both Matt and I. It's always been there's high moisture levels. But I just don't think, at least during my youth, that mold seemed to be the same problem that it is today. And I wonder if I'm right or wrong about that based on your experiences. And why do you think mold may be more debilitating today than it had been in the past?
Yeah. So definitely it's a bigger problem now than it used to be. And it's a lot of what you said. We're exposed to so many more toxins than we used to be. You mentioned food, our ingredients in our food and the supply chain and what our food goes through, and the depletion of nutrients, and the soil is depleted, and just food is totally different than it used to be. There's not, and then the microbiome, like our microbiomes are not as diverse because of that. And also just all the, pesticides and chemicals and everything, and all the products and in outside and everything that we're exposed to. So it all adds up. So, more 70% ish of people have a gut issue, and it all, kind of goes back to the gut, because that's, as we already said, is the interface with the external environment. So, with so many gut issues going on, we're already starting off behind to be able to fend off, mold, because generally, we would hope that we're exposed to mold, we breathe it in, our bodies process it out, it's fine. But we get overwhelmed. Our systems get overwhelmed so much more easily now. And also, it's modern building practices with all the drywall and the was wood and the other things that mold loves to feed on, and like the airtight environments. So it is also an issue with the boxes that we live in too. So I think, those are two of the big reasons.
Rich, I want to jump in, Rich, question. I have a question. So, a couple of questions for you, Dr. Stafford. The first one is pertaining to food. So, we often hear, and you said it, right? Don't eat peanuts because they're moldy. I have a very limited diet, and peanuts are one of the things I eat on a regular basis, but I don't think I'm impacted by it. So, I always struggle, like, should I cut peanuts out of my diet because they're high in mold, and I get shamed by a lot of people on social media, right? Or is it okay? Or am I increasing my toxicity with mold mycotoxins, right? So I'll pause there and see if maybe we can talk about that a little bit before I get into my next question.
Yeah. So, peanuts are unfortunately one of the highest foods in mold, but, not all peanuts are created equal. So, you can get, you can do organic, you can make sure they're not stored for a long period of time. You can make your own peanut butter. You can do things to kind of limit it, but I guess I wouldn't know how much, aflatoxin, for example, or ochratoxin that you have without testing, or that you're processing out right now. But it's a balance, because if peanuts are one of the few things that you tolerate, then okay, you have to get your calories somehow. So there comes to a point, I mean, I don't know how many foods you have on your list, but you know what I mean? Like you have to get some
Oh,
fat and everything
yeah,
like
no,
that.
no.
So.
And it's not because of other sensitivities. I'm just super picky and I love peanuts, right? So it's not that I won't or can't eat other things. It's just that I'm just very,
Okay.
whatever, right? So, but it's just interesting because I want to drill a little bit more about something else you said with Rich, because we have had people tell us on this podcast that some people are better able to process mold exposure and even chronic mold exposure. So when we're focusing on the subset of your patients that are chronically ill, I think I agree and I understand that yes, they need to remove themselves from the mold exposure, otherwise they won't be able to heal from their chronic illness. But when it comes to somebody who's quote unquote healthy and they have mold exposure and their bodies are different, their detox pathways are different, their genetics are different, or whatever it might be, and they're able to process that and filter it out through detox pathways, is it such a big deal for those people when it comes to these dietary triggers with mold and, whether it's coffee, whether it's peanuts, et cetera? You know what I mean? Because I don't know that every single person has to remove themselves from mold to not react badly to a Lyme infection. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's true. I mean, everyone has their different susceptibilities. So it's not just genetics. So yes, genetics, there are about 25% of people who have reduced capacity to recognize mold toxins. Body will not flag them as abnormal or clear them properly. It's not impossible, as people try to say. It's just going to be much reduced. It's like orders of magnitude reduced as far as like the ability to clear mycotoxins. They need much, much more support. So that's genetics. But then it's also, the state of the gut, the state of the nervous system, like all these different factors. So you have this set of susceptibilities and characteristics, and everyone's different in the household, say. And then say you have, a small amount of mold in your home. Okay, that could be fine for most people, except for maybe a very sensitive, person who's very sensitive to mold or genetically susceptible. But when there's more mold, as we increase the amount of mold, eventually everyone will react. So it just depends on the level of mold and your susceptibility. So we have to get those two variables. Like if those two variables are pretty okay, then fine. But if it's like, okay, the mold is pretty high there and someone's reacting to it, then, it all comes down to like that person. Like if someone in the family is reacting, then, it's
right. But
best.
I also think though, just to kind of fight myself here a little bit, right? It also, just because somebody's not responding to mold exposure doesn't mean that an illness, or whether it's COVID, whether it's a Lyme infection, whether it's a virus, whether it's a emotional stress or a lack of sleep, or an immune suppressing event, trauma, that those things won't cause them to become ill because they weren't before. So it's a big risk to not address it if you're exposed to mold, whether it be food in your environment or whatever it might be, right? But I think the $1 million question I have here is, so many of us are, have problematic gut microbiomes, which makes us more susceptible to mold exposure. People I talk to on a regular basis, I was overtreated with antibiotics when I was a kid, right? It was the pink drink, right? I'm 37 years old, and I forget what it was, but the bubblegum medicine, right? We took it all the time.
Yep.
My gut was destroyed. I was on antibiotics my whole life. Then when I got sick with Lyme, I was on massive antibiotics, and it's taken a while to rebuild my gut. So whether I'm healthy, quote unquote, and I know I've had antibiotic overusage, or whether I'm in the chronic illness community, what are some specific tools you can recommend to our listeners to help rebuild their gut, specifically the diversity of the flora of their gut, to help protect their, to help their immune system and also fight off toxins they come into contact with?
Yeah. So, if we already assume that you've made sure that you're not in a toxic exposure and that you're trying to limit toxins in your diet. So as far as rebuilding the gut, I love to talk about this. I'm probably, as far as I know, I'm one of the few mold practitioners who has a gut program. Like mold people don't talk enough about the gut and vice versa. So this is great. So as far as healing the gut, some of the supplements, that can be really useful. And I like to get a gut zoomer to figure out, or GI map to figure out what's going on.
What are those? Gut zoomer and GI map? Those are tests, I'm assuming, right? Those are some sort of tests you can
test.
Okay.
Functional stool tests, at home tests, and we get a really good, pages long, everything you wanted to know about it's the large intestine because it's a stool sample, but you can infer based on that the rest of the tube. So, so I like to supplement with whatever probiotics are low. Commonly, if we're not going to do testing, commonly low probiotic organisms for people who are chronically ill are going to be lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, akkermansia. So those are like 3 really big ones that I like to cycle through. And I also like to use spore-based probiotics because, you know, they survive more down to the large intestine. Things like digestive enzymes can help if there's, you know, digestive insufficiency. Things like butyrate can really help because butyrate is something that's made by the good gut bacteria. So if you don't have enough good gut bacteria, then you're probably not going to have enough butyrate. And that molecule actually sucks oxygen out of the colon, which is really important because a lot of the good gut bacteria, they like that anaerobic or low oxygen environment, and they will not thrive if there's too much oxygen there. So butyrate is a great thing that I supplement with. And then there's kind of the other nutrients like L-glutamine and zinc carnosine and aloe, for example, that are some other really good gut supplements that have been well studied to help with that mucus layer, to really soothe the gut, to help the gut just heal, because you really need to give it, we're constantly barraging our gut, you know, we're constantly eating, drinking, you know, our gut's constantly having to deal with things. So we want to make sure, you know, that we use these calming supplements as well.
So one of the videos I love, first of all, your social media is amazing. I have to tell everybody listening, they got to check you out on your social media. I think your handle is the same on both TikTok and Instagram, right? You are the Detox Doc _ on Instagram and just the Detox Doc on TikTok, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, if people want to learn, first of all, everything you're talking about, you have these little short videos that are so educational and fun to watch. So everybody has to go check you out because I absolutely love following you. But one of them that made me think about Rich and I was about hair loss, right? If you're losing your hair or you have no hair, you should be, you know, raising your red flags. Well, I started balding in my early 20s, right? And then shortly after, I got chronically ill from Lyme disease. Rich is, you know, I don't know, Rich, when you became bald, but right, you know, do you think
I
that?
was old, man.
Yeah, you
4
were.
daughters caused my hair to fall out.
But do you think that possibly somebody like that would have been a warning sign for me in my early 20s? Why am I balding in my early 20s? And I should have been looking for mold exposure, mycotoxins, or some sort of toxin causing my balding. Then maybe I could have gotten ahead of it and not become as ill as I was, right? So can you talk about the connection between, you know, or maybe I'm just making up a connection and there isn't one, but can you talk about that connection? And in my use case, was that a sign, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an under-recognized sign. And I like to talk about that a lot because it's your body goes into survival mode. And when that happens, hair is, you know, not considered necessary. So it's one of the first things to go, and the hair follicles will go into like a dormant state. So a lot of times they're in a dormant state, but they're not gone yet. So if we recognize that, then sometimes we can recover that, and it's a lag time, right? So 3 to 6 months, you know, between when something happens and when you're going to see the effects on your hair. But, you know, then it can just fall out. You know, there's telogen effluvium, fancy word for like a bunch of hair falling out when a stressful thing happens, whether it's illness or just stressful situation or what. But, you know, it's definitely a connection to not just mold, but any chronic illness for sure.
Okay. So another thing I want to ask you is, because I feel like so many of these things not only impact the chronic Lyme community, but the general public. And there's such a stigma to speak about it. So, you know, we are very public about Tick Boot Camp, and everybody knows we're very open. So I've had a lot of colleagues in the last couple of months share with me, young women in their 20s, when I mean like literally 21, 23, 25, 28, that have been struggling for years with severe stomach issues, severe gastrointestinal issues, and a lot of the endometriosis symptoms that are inflammation. And oftentimes we hear doctors tell us those things are related to, again, toxins, mold, potential Lyme infections, right? And their diets are so limited and they suffer greatly, and they're suffering in silence, right? So in those scenarios, what are the common things that you think are contributing to this large population of young women, at least from my experience, you know, at work, that are suffering from these types of problems?
I've seen that as well, Matt. You know, definitely I have several clients who fit that demographic who have similar issues that you're talking about. And I think it goes back to the things that we've been speaking about. You know, the gut microbiome it's not diverse. It's not able to fight off these things they're being exposed to every day. And then the inflammation, it accumulates. And I think that that's not really something that people think about, like this accumulation of inflammation. And it can, you know, have this, the mast cells can be overactive, and you know, you can have infertility, you can have, you know, just tons of hormone issues, and endometriosis, yeah, really super common now. And yeah, it's terrible, very painful for people. And yeah, I mean, I think it really relates, it's an inflammation issue. So anything that's going to contribute to inflammation is going to contribute to those disease processes.
What are your thoughts, though, when it comes to specific dietary triggers? Like, you know, I'll never forget the first time I heard this was from Ali Moresco in this community, where she said to me, hey, I can't handle gluten, I can't handle dairy, but I order semolina, semolina bread, you know, from Europe, or I get the, you know, I get the ingredients to make it, or I go to Europe and I'm fine. It's like, what are your thoughts as far as the quality of our food, right? All the chemicals and the pesticides, right? And is that really causing us to have these types of issues that maybe past generations did not, because our food wasn't as processed and poisoned as it is today?
Also,
Oh, for sure.
if we could add one more thing, also genetically altering the wheat products, and you know, and the level of gluten, for example, which is in some cases 10 times higher than it had been a generation ago because of the genetic alteration of the crops.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those chemical structures, our body doesn't know how to deal with them. You know, with chemicals, we weren't made to process them. You know, we've been eating wheat for so much longer than, you know, the chemicals that have now been added to it. So yeah, I mean, wheat isn't the primary problem. Like, gluten isn't the primary problem. I won't say it isn't a problem, but you know, it's become a problem because of everything that's been added to it. And, you know, glyphosate and everything else. It's definitely a huge trigger. I do have people try to limit gluten while they're healing from mold, just to limit the toxins, really limit added sugars, because sugar, it's toxic. So you know, fat is not the problem, sugar is the problem, you know, for people. And then processed foods, you know, so kind of those are the three categories. Gluten, and really grains too, like corn is very high in toxins now. So so corn is considered a grain. And so I do have people limit that, and really other grains as well. You know, some of them are a little more neutral, but short term, you know, I try to recommend a little more paleo. Everyone's different. You know, some people need like even more gentle than that, like a GAPS diet or things like that. There's not one healing diet that works for everybody. Some people do well on carnivore, you know, it depends on the person. So yeah.
Let's talk about the various mold mycotoxins and the psychological implications that come along with them. Because we had Dr. and Rich is going to kind of probably roll his eyes. I always talk about Dr. Jill Carnahan. I absolutely love her, and she blew me away in her podcast. So, you know, she was telling us about different.
I was waiting for this, by the way, Dr. Stafford.
He knew it was coming.
Why it took so long?
So, you know, but she talked to us about different mycotoxins and how they have different psychological implications, right? One, the homicide house, where this one house had a toxic mold, and there was a homicide and then a suicide/murder. And then they realized it had this type of severe mold in it that was known to cause aggression and anger. So I don't think people realize how severe mold can impact somebody's psychological state. So if you can just kind of build that out for us a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of different effects that different molds can have. So if we're talking specifically psychological, so, you know, I will argue though, I mean, it's not just one, you know, toxin that can cause psych issues or mold rage, you know, as it were. So for example, you know, even the humble common ochratoxin A, you know, it affects the occipital lobe, you know, it can cause severe headaches. It can cause dizziness, you know, it can cause dehydration because it affects the kidneys. So, I mean, all of those can then cause psychological issues and mold rage. So, I mean, I guess there's like, it's a layered answer because I'm more I like to look at the whole picture. Like, okay, we're talking about corn, and peanuts, and then aflatoxins, which affect the liver strongly, and they're going to cause liver inflammation, and then that causes the lack of hormone breakdown. And so then if people have like increased estrogen, and then they're going to be a little more also having issues with mood as well. So there's downstream and upstream effects of all these things. But is there one toxin that can cause mold rage? I mean, maybe Stachybotrys toxins like the trichothecenes could be more likely to, because they're so toxic in small quantities. But I really think that it's important to realize that even if you just have like a high citrulline, for example, from grains, then you could still, that causes gut issues. And if your gut is directly connected to your brain through the vagus nerve, so then you could also get mold rage from that. So probably not the answer you were expecting, but there you go.
No, but it's good, right? And I think though that, well, one question to that is, people listen to this podcast all around the world, and I think everybody wants to know, is there a way, and is there a standard blood test or urine test or stool test that is covered by insurance, that people can reach out to their local doctor wherever they are to ask for this test to determine, am I toxic, and what kind of toxins do I have at a general level? Is there something that might be covered for people? Because we always know cost is a factor when it comes to running all these tests.
Yeah, absolutely. So short answer is no, probably not.
Okay.
So there are tests that you can get done that are useful. There is not a direct mold toxin test, mycotoxin test that is covered by regular insurance plans. So I know there are talks of like one of the mold toxin companies is potentially considering it for certain states and certain insurances, but it's not a widespread thing, no. But there are labs you can get done that will give good information, like even your simple CBC. Like if you have high eosinophils, you could be dealing with mold or parasites. You can have a high or low white count with mold. You can have ESR, CRP, inflammatory markers are really useful to get to see what is your level of systemic inflammation. That's one marker that's good to get, a full thyroid panel to see if there's any effect. Like I see a lot of, autoimmune thyroid issues from mold. Things like your vitamin D level. Vitamin D is depleted by mold. So I like to see that for people to get done from the regular checkups. But yeah, urine mycotoxins or the blood antibodies, which are also useful, but urine it's different information because it's antibodies or the toxin levels, but they're both useful, just different. And urine is much easier to obtain. So that's what I usually use.
Yeah. So Dr. Stafford, I want to come back to a part of the conversation you and Matt were having before. And Matt had asked you whether or not you believe someone could heal if they were in fight or flight, right? That they had to, you have to regulate the nervous system if you're going to be able to heal, because if you're in fight or flight, your immune system is going to be suppressed and you're not going to get better, right? So I want to take it back another step to my argument, which is I think the first step you need to take is to test your environment for mold. And the reason I'd argue that you have to test your environment for mold is in part because you're not going to be able to get better if you go back into the moldy environment, and all of the other money that you're going to be spending and all of the other care that you're going to receive is not going to be effective. But now on the fight or flight piece, you and Matt now have just defined mold as essentially a spectrum of mycotoxins, and there are a lot of different types of mold. It's not just mold. There are a lot of different types of mold, and different spores are going to affect you differently. And to the extent that either specific spores, which I think you disagree with, or the combination of different types of spores are now causing you to have a physiological basis for being in fight or flight, well, you're not going to get better either. I mean, putting aside whether or not you're immunosuppressed because of the toxins, you're going to be immunosuppressed if you're in something even short of mold rage, because you're going to be in fight or flight and you cannot get out of fight or flight, even with some of the the exercises that you had just given, whether they be eye movement or tapping or any of these other things that you can use to get some relief from fight or flight, but it's not going to resolve this long term if you have, you have these mold spores in your body.
Yeah, true. And I think it's so a couple of things on that. So I think, yeah, and the reason why I like to look at the full picture of like the mycotoxin results and the collection of what they have going on as well as the levels is because more and more research is coming out that it's not even just, it's not even just the mycotoxins that affect us. It's like the VOCs and the other byproducts of mold that cause this inflammation. So really the important thing is, how inflamed are you? And what all is going on, and how is your gut, how is your nervous system, how is your environment, right? I definitely recommend getting the environment tested. DIY can be done. It is often more confusing and leads to more frustration, so I recommend to work with a professional whenever possible, for sure, to get tested, the environment.
So a couple of follow-up questions that I know, just again, in knowing the things people are thinking and always asking and get kind of confused about, that I know you are so knowledgeable on. If somebody sees mold in their shower or in their home and it's a mild mold, and I don't even know that's really such a thing, right? Can they try to clean it themselves? Because I know everybody's like, oh, just get a professional. But people are like, I don't have the money. I can't hire a professional, right? So what are their options if they can't afford a professional? How do they remediate mold in their home? What's the proper substance? Michelle McKeon, we've had other people tell us, hey, EC3, right? Throw it in your laundry, buy the spray, concentrated, non-concentrated, spray it. I've used it, Rich has used it, it's worked well. But what is your professional recommendation for mold remediation in your bathroom, in your home, et cetera?
Yeah, so I like the EC3 products, definitely. Anything natural, tea tree oil, if you don't have pets, is really good, as well as just for like mold in the bathroom. There's like a baking soda, vinegar, things like that you can use. Natural is better, not bleached. It is gonna make everything put off more toxins. So yeah, if the biggest thing I'll just go back to is the dehumidifiers, or keeping the humidity low. Like if you see mold and you're able to just use some of these natural products to clean it, wearing a mask or ideally a respirator. I can't reach my respirator right now. I have like a full face respirator. Pretty OCD about mold at this point. So, and then, you want to make sure that the mold, it's prevented from coming back by keeping the humidity less than 50%, ideally. So that is probably the most important thing to do if you see mold, aside from, getting it assessed if possible, is to get that humidity down, figure out where, because mold is a moisture issue. So you have to figure out, like, what is the moisture issue? Like, do I just need to run the bathroom fan? Is it as simple as that? Hopefully. Otherwise, where is there some structural integrity issue? What is going on that this moisture is allowing this mold to proliferate?
Yeah, so the next question I have is, because some people listening, they like to just do trial and error. Again, budget is a concern. So oftentimes I say, maybe I'm exposed to mold. I don't know, but maybe I'll just try some binders or some tools to see, am I feeling better and how am I responding to that binder? Which, if I'm not toxic with mold, then it's just really not going to harm me. But if I am, it could have a positive benefit, right? So is that a safe approach, or do you think it's a harmful approach? And if it is a safe approach, what are some generic broad binders people can try to see if they have, any benefit from taking them, and to kind of have to cut out the red tape of, an expensive doctor, an expensive test. And now I know that this is something you'd probably caution against, but some of these things are safe tools that people can try if you think that's a good idea or not.
Yeah, definitely common question. I would say, just if your bowels aren't moving, like if you're constipated, binders are not a good idea to just dive into. But yeah, I mean, sometimes binders are an integral part of any detox regimen, but they're not, as we've already established, the first step. First step is going to be your anti-inflammatory things, protecting your body. So, I don't even start right away with binders like the first day of a protocol. I'll do things like liver support, like boosting up your liver and your kidneys. So I like to use liver support, and I have supplement lists on Fullscript. I use Fullscript stuff. I use Cellcore stuff, so people, I have, all that accessible to people. And so liver support, I like to start with. And gut, I really start with gut before I even do glutathione and binders. If somebody is having a lot of gut issues or anything that we determine is a gut issue, even if it's not a primary gut issue, I do that for a bit before I'll even add in binders. So it leads to much less detox reactions or like herx reactions, or basically feeling bad while you're detoxing, if you do it in that way. But yeah, I love binders. I love, going in the sauna and then taking a binder to bind up everything that's been mobilized. Binders are great, but you have to use them properly. And a lot of times people come to me, they've taken a lot of binders, they have backfired, caused a lot of more gut issues. So if you're going to start with anything, I would start with more of the protective, like anti-inflammatory stuff.
Yeah, Rich can speak to that because he took chlorella and it destroyed him. So he's a proof positive there. But I'm gonna hand it over. I know we got like 3 minutes left now, or for whatever it is. So I'm gonna hand it over to Rich to end this because I can keep you for another 2 hours. So you've been amazing.
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Stafford. You have been awesome, and we do want to offer folks an opportunity to learn how to get in touch with you. So can you first tell us again the titles of your 3 books and where folks can locate those books? Let folks know where they can find you on social media, and can you also let us know whether or not you're taking patients, and if you are, or taking clients if it's outside of your geographic area, how can folks get in touch with you to work with you?
Yeah, thank you. So our books are The Inner Journey, Candida, Detox, and Conquering Mold. They're on Amazon and on Audible. And as well, my social media is the Detox Doc on all platforms, and people can contact me there. I am taking clients right now. I have a gut reset program and a root restore mold detox program. So those are a few months each. So that is, how I can work with you if interested. And my website is drstafford.com with the doctor spelled out.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. This was an awesome interview. We are really excited to have introduced you to our community, and we strongly urge folks to consider working with you if they have any of the issues that you've outlined for us.
Thank you so much for having me.